It was supposed to be an ordinary day at school. The father, still wearing his work clothes, had just wrapped up an exhausting meeting and rushed to pick up his son. As the bell rang, students poured out into the yard, but his son didn't come out immediately. He found him sitting quietly on a bench, a book bag clutched to his chest, looking nervous. When asked what was wrong, the boy hesitated. That's when the officer appeared. The man's uniform was sharp, his voice curt, and his tone heavy with disdain. "Is this your kid?" the officer asked, gesturing toward the boy as if he were an object, not a person. The father nodded, his protective instincts already kicking in. "Yeah, he's mine." "Why?" The officer smirked, his lips curling in a way that sent a chill down the father's spine. "Your boy here was loitering by the entrance. Looked like he was waiting for trouble. Told him to move along, but he got mouthy. Guess that runs in the family." The father frowned. "Loitering? He was waiting for me. What's the problem?" The officer stepped closer, his hand casually resting on his holstered weapon. "The problem is, I don't take attitude from anyone. Especially not kids like him." The father felt his heart race, but he held his ground. "Kids like him? What exactly do you mean by that?" The officer didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the boy. "You think you're tough, don't you? Sitting here like you own the place. Maybe this'll teach you some manners." Without warning, the officer grabbed a steaming cup of coffee from a nearby teacher's desk and threw it. The scalding liquid splashed across the boy's face. The boy screamed, clutching his face as tears streamed down his cheeks. The father lunged forward, his voice trembling with fury. "What the hell are you doing? He's a child." The officer shrugged, his expression cold and unmoved. "Maybe now he'll learn to stay in his place." The scene froze in the father's mind, the pain on his son's face, the mocking smirk on the officer's lips, and the stunned silence of the teachers and parents who witnessed it all but did nothing. The father clenched his fists, his mind racing. He wanted to yell, to fight back, to do something. But instead, he pulled his son close, whispering reassurances, promising it would be okay, even though his own heart was breaking. As he looked at the officer, though, he knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Later that night, as the boy slept with a cold compress on his face, the father sat at the kitchen table, his mind spinning with anger, humiliation, and determination. This wasn't just about his son. It wasn't just about one bad officer. It was about every parent, every child, every family who had ever been made to feel powerless in the face of injustice. And he wasn't powerless, not by a long shot. The next morning, he stood in his office, the FBI badge clipped to his belt, and picked up the phone. His voice was steady as he spoke into the receiver. "I need a file pulled on Officer Daniel Travers. Everything. I don't care how small it seems. I want it all on my desk by the end of the day." What the officer didn't know, what no one at that school knew, was that this father wasn't just any father. He was someone who knew how to dig deep, uncover truths, and hold people accountable. And as he began to connect the dots, unraveling a web of corruption, prejudice, and abuse tied to this officer, one thought drove him forward: justice. But justice doesn't come easy. As the story unfolds, you'll see the lengths this father is willing to go to protect his son and bring a racist officer to his knees. What secrets will he uncover? How far will the system go to protect one of its own? And when it's all said and done, will this father's quest for justice finally bring the closure his family deserves, or will it tear everything apart? Stay with us to find out. At Plow of Twist, we stand firmly against racism in all its forms. To our Black audience members and everyone fighting for equality, know that you are seen, valued, and supported. This story sheds light on injustice while delivering a powerful message about resilience and justice. Thank you for being here, and we hope you enjoy this gripping tale. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay updated with our stories. Now, sit back and enjoy. The sun was setting behind the rows of red brick buildings lining the streets of a modest suburb just outside Atlanta, Georgia. It was a neighborhood where the hum of everyday life was a comforting constant, children playing basketball in driveways, parents unloading groceries from their cars, and neighbors sharing conversations over white picket fences. Among the residents was Marcus Evans, a 38-year-old single father who had built a quiet but proud life for himself and his 12-year-old son, Jaden. Marcus had always been a man of principle. With his lean build, sharp suits, and a calm but commanding presence, he carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent his life in pursuit of justice. But few knew the details of Marcus's work. He never spoke of it openly, not even to his closest friends. As an FBI agent, Marcus had seen the best and worst of humanity. He had spent years navigating a world filled with secrets, betrayal, and injustice. Yet, when he came home, none of that mattered. The world outside the door was a battlefield, but inside his small, meticulously maintained house, he was just Jaden's dad. Jaden was Marcus's entire world. With his wide, curious eyes, tight curls, and boundless energy, Jaden was a boy who radiated innocence and hope. He loved reading, especially science fiction, and spent hours drawing intricate starships and alien landscapes in his sketchbook. Despite his love for fantastical worlds, Jaden was acutely aware of the real one. Marcus had always been honest with his son about the challenges they faced as a black family in America. Jaden had learned early on about the extra caution he needed to take in certain situations, the way he had to work twice as hard to earn half the respect, and the importance of staying composed no matter what. The day everything changed began like any other. Marcus had left work early to attend a parent-teacher meeting at Jaden's school. The school itself was nothing remarkable, an aging, beige building with faded banners promoting diversity and respect. Marcus had always felt conflicted about the place. It was supposed to be a safe haven for his son, a place to learn and grow. But the subtle tensions were always there, the condescending looks from certain staff members, the way Jaden's achievements were often overlooked in favor of his white peers, and the dismissive tone some teachers used when addressing Marcus himself. As Marcus entered the school's main hallway, he noticed Jaden sitting alone on a bench near the principal's office. The boy's head was down, his shoulders hunched, and his backpack sat awkwardly on his lap. Marcus immediately felt a pang of concern. Jaden wasn't the kind of kid to get into trouble. He was quiet, respectful, and always eager to please. Something was wrong. Marcus approached, his voice soft but firm. "Jaden, what's going on? Why are you sitting here?" Jaden hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the straps of his backpack. I didn't do anything wrong, Dad. I swear." He wouldn't listen. Who wouldn't listen? Marcus crouched down to meet his son's eyes. "Tell me what happened." Before Jaden could answer, a voice interrupted them. It was Officer Daniel Travers, the school resource officer. Travers was a tall, stocky man in his mid-40s, with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl etched into his face. He carried himself with an air of authority that bordered on arrogance, and his reputation among the students was less than stellar. To many, he was a bully in uniform, someone who used his position to intimidate rather than protect. "That your kid?" Travers asked, his tone flat and dismissive. Marcus straightened up, his protective instincts kicking in. "Yes, he's my son. Is there a problem?" Travers smirked, his eyes narrowing as he looked Marcus up and down. "Yeah, there's a problem. Your boy was hanging around near the entrance after the bell rang. Looked like he was waiting for something, or someone." Marcus frowned, his confusion turning to frustration. "He was waiting for me. That's what kids do when their parents are picking them up. Why is that a problem?" Travers shrugged, his expression indifferent. "He got mouthy when I asked him to move along. I don't tolerate that kind of attitude." Jaden's voice was small but firm. I didn't get mouthy. I just told him I was waiting for you. Travers's smirk widened. That's not how I remember it. Marcus could feel his blood boiling, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had dealt with men like Travers before, men who thrived on provocation, who used their authority as a weapon. Listen, Marcus said, his voice measured. My son didn't do anything wrong. If there's an issue, you take it up with me. Not him. Travers's expression darkened. Maybe you need to teach your kid some respect. This isn't the first time he's caught my attention. The comment hit Marcus like a slap. He knew exactly what Travers meant, and it had nothing to do with Jaden's behavior. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes locked on the officer's. You don't know my son. And you don't get to talk about him like that. For a moment, the hallway was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Travers glanced at Jaden, then back at Marcus. You people always think you're above the rules. Maybe you need a reminder. Before Marcus could respond, Travers grabbed the cup of coffee sitting on a nearby desk and hurled it toward Jaden. The scalding liquid splashed across the boy's face, and Jaden let out a sharp cry of pain. Marcus's heart stopped as he watched his son clutch his face, tears streaming down his cheeks. Marcus lunged forward, his voice trembling with fury. What the hell is wrong with you? He's a child. Travers didn't flinch. He simply crossed his arms and stared at Marcus with a smug expression. Maybe now he'll think twice before disrespecting me. The sound of Jaden's sobs filled the hallway, and Marcus felt a wave of helplessness crash over him. He wanted to scream, to fight, to make Travers pay for what he had done. But instead, he focused on his son, pulling him close and whispering reassurances as his mind raced. As he walked Jaden out of the school, his heart heavy with anger and shame, Marcus knew one thing for certain, this wasn't over. Travers had crossed a line, and Marcus was going to make sure he paid for it. But how far would he go to protect his son? And what price would he pay to expose the truth? The answers lay ahead, and they would change everything. Marcus sat at the edge of Jaden's bed, carefully dabbing a cool, damp cloth against his son's cheek. The redness had subsided slightly, but the emotional scars were evident in the boy's tear-filled eyes. Jaden sat still, his small hands gripping the edges of the blanket as though it were his only lifeline. Marcus tried to focus on soothing his son, but his mind churned with anger and frustration. He had spent his entire career standing up against injustice, yet here he was, unable to protect his own child from the very thing he fought against daily. Jaden's voice broke the silence, trembling but steady enough to make Marcus's chest tighten. Dad, why did he do that to me? I didn't do anything wrong. Marcus paused, struggling to find the words that wouldn't sound like hollow reassurances. You didn't do anything wrong, Jaden. That man, he's just the kind of person who looks for someone to hurt, and today, he chose you. Jaden lowered his eyes, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. But why me? Because of the way I look. Marcus sighed, his heart aching as he nodded. Because of the way you look, yes. Some people see our skin and make all kinds of terrible assumptions. But listen to me, Jaden. What happened today wasn't your fault, and it's not who you are. Do you hear me? You're smart, kind, and brave. No one can take that away from you. Jaden blinked back tears, but his silence only deepened Marcus's resolve. He leaned forward, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. I'm going to fix this. I don't know how yet, but I promise you, I'll make sure that man pays for what he did. Later that night, after Jaden had finally fallen asleep, Marcus sat at the dining table, his laptop open in front of him. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his determined face as he typed furiously, sifting through databases and making calls to contacts who owed him favors. Travers's name came up quickly, along with a detailed record of his career. At first glance, it was clean: commendations, promotions, and glowing reviews. But Marcus knew better than to trust the surface. He began digging deeper, cross-referencing old cases, reviewing complaints filed against the officer, and searching for inconsistencies. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Travers had a history of accusations, excessive force, racial profiling, misconduct, but each complaint had been quietly dismissed or investigated by internal affairs with no further action. Marcus clenched his jaw as he read the reports. This wasn't just about Travers. It was about a system designed to protect men like him, to bury the voices of those who dared to speak up. The next day, Marcus drove to the FBI field office. As he walked through the familiar halls, nodding at colleagues, his mind was already strategizing. He approached his close friend and fellow agent, Samantha Rivers, a sharp-witted investigator known for her tenacity. Samantha looked up from her desk, her brow furrowing at Marcus's expression. "What's going on, Marcus? You look like you're ready to take down a whole cartel." Marcus didn't smile. "I need your help. There's a situation involving my son, and it's about to get very personal." Samantha leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You've got my attention. Start from the beginning." Marcus recounted the incident at the school, his voice measured but laced with barely contained fury. Samantha listened intently, her expression shifting from shock to disgust as he described Travers's actions. When Marcus finished, Samantha didn't hesitate. "We need to hit this from all angles. Official complaints, media exposure, anything we can use to apply pressure. But if you're going after a cop like Travers, you know what that means. The department's going to close ranks. They'll fight tooth and nail to protect him." Marcus nodded. "I know. That's why I need more than complaints. I need proof. Something they can't deny or sweep under the rug." Over the next several days, Marcus and Samantha worked tirelessly, piecing together a case that went far beyond the incident at the school. They uncovered a pattern of abuse that Travers had managed to hide behind his badge, a trail of intimidation, violence, and corruption that spanned years. Witnesses were reluctant to come forward, fearful of retaliation, but Marcus's determination was unshakable. He reached out to community leaders, advocacy groups, and even journalists who had reported on police misconduct in the past. Meanwhile, the tension at home grew thicker with each passing day. Jaden had become withdrawn, his usual spark dimmed by the weight of what had happened. Marcus tried to reassure him, but he knew words could only do so much. The boy needed to see that justice was possible, that his father's promise wasn't empty. One evening, as Marcus was reviewing documents at the kitchen table, Jaden approached him hesitantly. "Dad, do you think he'll ever get in trouble for what he did? Or is he going to get away with it like he always does?" Marcus looked up, his gaze steady. "He won't get away with it. Not this time. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take work. You just have to trust me." Jaden nodded, but his uncertainty was clear. Marcus felt a pang of guilt. He wanted to protect his son from the harsh realities of the world, but there was no shielding him from this. All he could do was show him that standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult, was always worth it. As the investigation progressed, Marcus began to notice something unsettling. Travers seemed to be aware that someone was coming after him. He had started showing up at the school more frequently, his presence a looming threat that made Jaden's stomach churn every time he saw the officer's face. Marcus knew this wasn't a coincidence. Travers was trying to send a message, a warning to back off. But Marcus didn't back off. He pushed harder, digging deeper, and what he uncovered sent a chill down his spine. Travers wasn't just an officer with a pattern of misconduct. He was connected to a network of individuals who had been using their positions to exploit vulnerable communities, covering up their actions with a combination of intimidation and institutional silence. Marcus stared at the evidence in front of him, his mind racing. This wasn't just about one man. This was bigger than he had imagined. And if he was going to take Travers down, he would have to be careful. The stakes were higher now, and the risks far greater. As he prepared to make his next move, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Travers wasn't going to go down without a fight, and the closer Marcus got to the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. But there was no turning back now. Justice was within reach, and Marcus was willing to risk everything to ensure that no other child would have to endure what his son had. What Marcus didn't know was just how far Travers and his allies were willing to go to protect their secrets, and how the battle for justice would push him to the very edge of what he thought he was capable of. The tension was rising, and the lines between right and wrong were about to blur in ways Marcus could never have anticipated. The truth was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. Marcus stood outside the courthouse, the wind cutting through his coat as he clutched the folder in his hand. Inside was everything he and Samantha had uncovered, evidence of Officer Travers's long history of misconduct, but also something far worse, a conspiracy involving several officers in his precinct. They had manipulated reports, intimidated witnesses, and systematically targeted black families in the community. Marcus's jaw tightened as he stared up at the imposing building. This was the moment everything would change. He wasn't just here as an FBI agent or a father. He was here as both, and he wouldn't leave until justice was served. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and Travers's colleagues, all waiting to see how this would play out. Travers sat at the defendant's table, his uniform neatly pressed, his face a mask of indifference. He looked untouchable, like a man who believed he'd walk away from this unscathed. Marcus couldn't suppress the surge of anger that rose in his chest. This man had hurt his son, humiliated him, and used his position to terrorize others. Today, Marcus would make sure Travers felt the weight of his actions. Samantha leaned in, her voice low but steady. Everything's in place. The witnesses are ready, and the evidence is airtight. He's not walking away from this. Marcus nodded, his focus unwavering. As the proceedings began, the prosecutor laid out the case with precision. Testimonies from community members described Travers's pattern of intimidation and abuse, each account painting a damning picture. Then came the hard evidence, surveillance footage, falsified reports, and records of complaints that had been conveniently buried. The tension in the room grew with each revelation. When it was Marcus's turn to testify, he walked to the stand with calm determination. The prosecutor began with straightforward questions, establishing his credibility as an FBI agent and his connection to the case. Then they delved into the incident with Jaden. "Agent Evans, can you describe what happened to your son on the day in question?" Marcus's voice was steady, but the weight of his emotions was clear. He recounted every detail, from the moment he found Jaden sitting on the bench to the scalding coffee Travers had thrown. He described his son's pain, both physical and emotional, and the helplessness he had felt as a father. The room was silent, every word sinking deep into the minds of those listening. When the defense attorney began their cross-examination, their strategy was obvious: discredit Marcus and paint Travers as a dedicated officer who had acted in the heat of the moment. But Marcus was ready. "Agent Evans, would you say you approached Officer Travers with hostility that day?" "No," Marcus replied firmly. "I approached him as a concerned father." "And yet, you claim he targeted your son without provocation. Isn't it possible that your son's behavior might have been misinterpreted?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Jaden is 12 years old. He wasn't loitering, he wasn't causing trouble, and he certainly wasn't a threat. Travers didn't misinterpret anything. He saw a black boy and made a choice." The attorney hesitated, but Marcus pressed on. "This isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about a pattern, a deliberate abuse of power that has gone unchecked for too long." The room was electric with tension as Marcus stepped down. Travers's smirk had faded, replaced by a tight-lipped expression that betrayed his growing unease. But Marcus wasn't done. He returned to his seat, meeting Travers's gaze with an intensity that made the officer shift uncomfortably in his chair. As the trial continued, the defense's case unraveled. Witness after witness testified about Travers's actions, their voices trembling with fear and anger. Samantha had done her part, ensuring that every detail was meticulously documented. By the time the prosecutor made their closing argument, the evidence was overwhelming. But Travers wasn't ready to give up. As the judge announced a recess, he approached Marcus in the hallway, his demeanor as smug as ever. "You think you've won, don't you?" Travers said, his voice low and venomous. "You think you're some kind of hero." Marcus didn't flinch. "This isn't about me. It's about accountability. Something you've been avoiding your entire career." Travers stepped closer, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're just another suit playing by the rules. You think this trial is going to change anything? People like me, we don't lose." "Not really." Marcus's expression remained calm, but his words were sharp. "That's where you're wrong. You're losing right now. And when that verdict comes in, you'll lose everything you've used to protect yourself. Your badge, your reputation, your power, it's all gone." Travers sneered, but Marcus could see the cracks forming. The man who had thrown coffee on a child in a show of dominance now stood on the verge of being stripped of everything. For the first time, Travers looked vulnerable. The courtroom reconvened, and the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Marcus's heart pounded as he held Jaden's hand, the boy's small fingers gripping his tightly. The judge's words echoed through the room, each one a hammer blow to the defense. "Guilty. Guilty. Guilty." The finality of it washed over Marcus like a wave, a mixture of relief and vindication. As Travers was led away in handcuffs, the room erupted in murmurs. Reporters scrambled for quotes, community members embraced, and Marcus knelt to meet Jaden's gaze. "It's over," Marcus said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "He won't hurt anyone else." Jaden nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and pride. "You kept your promise, Dad." Marcus smiled, pulling his son into a tight hug. "Always." But even as the courtroom emptied, Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Justice had been served, but the fight wasn't over. There were more Traverses out there, more systems that needed to be challenged. And Marcus was ready to face them, one battle at a time. As the courtroom emptied and the sounds of murmurs and reporters' questions faded, Marcus remained seated for a moment, watching as Travers was led away in handcuffs. The sight should have brought him satisfaction, but instead, it left a hollow ache in his chest. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo the pain that Jaden had endured. Marcus felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment pressing down on him, and as much as he wanted to celebrate the victory, he couldn't shake the lingering anger and sadness. Jaden stood quietly by his side, his hand still gripping Marcus's tightly. The boy's face, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now carried a quiet strength. Marcus looked down at him, seeing not just a child but a resilient young man who had endured more than he ever should have. He placed a hand on Jaden's shoulder, squeezing gently. "You okay, buddy?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but steady. Jaden nodded, his eyes focused on the doorway where Travers had disappeared moments earlier. "Yeah, I think so." "Is he really going to stay in jail?" Marcus hesitated, knowing how complicated the system could be. "For now, yes. He's been found guilty, and he'll face his punishment. But what's more important is that everyone knows what he did. He can't hide behind his badge anymore." Jaden looked up at his father, his expression thoughtful. "You did all that for me, didn't you?" Marcus crouched down to meet Jaden's gaze, his hands resting on his son's shoulders. "I did it for you, but not just for you. For every kid like you who's ever been hurt or scared because of someone like him. I couldn't just let it go. You deserved better, and so does everyone else." Jaden blinked, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was so scared that day, Dad. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe I did something wrong. Marcus's heart ached as he pulled Jaden into a hug, holding him tightly. You didn't do anything wrong. Not then, not ever. What happened wasn't your fault, and it never will be. Remember that, okay? Jaden nodded against his father's chest, his voice muffled. Okay. As they left the courthouse, the buzz of reporters waiting outside was overwhelming. Microphones and cameras were thrust toward them, voices shouting questions about the trial and the verdict. Marcus shielded Jaden with his arm, his face calm but firm as he addressed the crowd. This case was never about revenge, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise. It was about accountability. It was about showing that no one is above the law, not even those who wear a badge. My son deserves to grow up in a world where he feels safe, where he's treated with respect, and where justice is more than just a word. Today was one step toward that world. The reporters pressed for more, but Marcus turned away, guiding Jaden through the crowd and toward their car. As they drove home, the silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. Jaden stared out the window, his thoughts clearly racing, while Marcus kept his eyes on the road, his mind replaying everything that had led to this moment. When they arrived home, the familiar comfort of their house felt almost surreal. Marcus set his keys on the counter and looked around, the quietness of the space a stark contrast to the chaos of the courtroom. Jaden sat at the kitchen table, his sketchbook in front of him, but he didn't pick up his pencil. Instead, he stared at the blank page, his brow furrowed. What's on your mind? Marcus asked, sitting across from him. Jaden hesitated before speaking. Do you think people will change because of what happened? Do you think they'll stop doing stuff like that? Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. I wish I could say yes, Jaden. I wish I could promise that this is the last time something like this will happen. But the truth is, change takes time. A long time. And it takes people standing up, speaking out, and refusing to let things stay the same. Jaden looked up, his eyes searching his father's face. Like you did? Marcus smiled faintly. Yeah, like I did. And like you can do, too. You're stronger than you realize, Jaden. What you went through was awful, but you didn't let it break you. That kind of strength can change the world, even if it's just one person at a time. Jaden nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I want to do that someday. I want to help people like you do. Marcus's chest swelled with pride, but he kept his tone gentle. You already are, Jaden. Just by being who you are, by standing up for yourself and not letting anyone make you feel small. That's where it starts. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. The story of the trial spread quickly, and Marcus found himself fielding calls and messages from people all over the community, and beyond. Some were congratulatory, others were emotional, sharing their own experiences of injustice and thanking him for standing up. Marcus responded to as many as he could, but his focus remained on Jaden, ensuring that his son felt safe and supported. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Jaden turned to Marcus, a question lingering in his eyes. Do you think he's sorry? Travers, I mean. Do you think he regrets what he did? Marcus considered the question carefully. I don't know, Jaden. Maybe he regrets getting caught. Maybe he regrets losing his power. But whether or not he feels sorry isn't what matters. What matters is that he's being held accountable. That's how we make sure people like him think twice before they hurt someone again. Jaden nodded, his gaze thoughtful. I hope he does. I hope he understands what he did was wrong. Marcus put an arm around his son, pulling him close. Me too, buddy. Me too. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus and Jaden began to settle back into their routines, though the experience had left a lasting mark on both of them. Marcus knew the fight for justice was far from over, but for now, he was content knowing that he had done everything he could to protect his son and make their world a little safer. And as he watched Jaden's confidence slowly return, his smile growing brighter with each passing day, Marcus felt a quiet sense of hope, a belief that, despite the challenges ahead, they would face them together. The days after the verdict felt surreal, like a storm had passed, leaving a stillness that Marcus hadn't anticipated. For weeks, his life had been consumed by the trial, the investigation, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Now, with the courtroom battles behind him, he found himself standing in the quiet aftermath, grappling with what came next. Justice had been served, but the echoes of the ordeal lingered, not just for him but for everyone involved. The community's reaction had been a mix of relief, anger, and exhaustion. For some, the verdict was a long overdue acknowledgement of the systemic failures they had endured for years. For others, it was a reminder of how far the fight for equality still had to go. Marcus had received countless messages of support, but not all of them were encouraging. The backlash had begun almost immediately, with Travers's defenders painting him as a scapegoat and accusing Marcus of using his position to settle a personal vendetta. Marcus sat at his desk late one night, his phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. He ignored them, his eyes fixed on the stack of files before him. They weren't related to Travers or the trial. They were new cases, new injustices waiting to be addressed. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt the weight of his work pressing down on him in a way he couldn't shake. He had always known the battle for justice was endless, but now it felt personal in a way it never had before. Jaden was asleep upstairs, his room finally feeling like a place of comfort again. The boy had begun to smile more, to laugh more, and to talk about the future with a sense of optimism that had been absent for months. Still, Marcus couldn't ignore the questions that lingered in his son's eyes whenever the trial was mentioned. Jaden was processing everything in his own way, and Marcus knew that healing wouldn't happen overnight. The next morning, Marcus drove Jaden to school. It was the first time Jaden had asked to be dropped off at the front entrance since the incident with Travers. As they pulled up, Marcus glanced at his son, searching for any signs of hesitation. Jaden met his gaze with a small smile, his confidence slowly returning. "Are you sure you're okay?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle. Jaden nodded. "Yeah. I think I'm ready." Marcus watched as his son stepped out of the car and walked toward the school doors, his head held high. A sense of pride swelled in Marcus's chest, but it was accompanied by a pang of worry. The world hadn't changed overnight, and he knew there were still battles ahead. But seeing Jaden's resilience reminded him of why he fought in the first place. At work, Marcus found himself drawn into conversations with colleagues who had followed the trial closely. Some praised him for his courage, while others tiptoed around the subject, their discomfort evident. Samantha was one of the few who addressed it directly, her tone a mix of admiration and concern. "You've made a lot of waves, Marcus," she said, leaning against the doorframe of his office. "The kind of waves that don't just settle quietly." Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I know. But I couldn't let it go, Sam. You saw what Travers did. What he's been doing for years. Someone had to stand up to him." Samantha nodded. "And you did. But you also put a target on your back. There are people who don't like what you've done, and they're not going to just let it slide." Marcus rubbed his temples, the weight of her words sinking in. He had already received thinly veiled threats, anonymous messages warning him to back off. It wasn't the first time his work had made him enemies, but this felt different. This was personal. That evening, Marcus and Jaden sat on the couch, flipping through channels in search of something light to watch. A news segment about the trial appeared, and Marcus reached for the remote, ready to change the channel. But Jaden stopped him. "Wait. I want to see this," Jaden said, his voice calm but firm. Marcus hesitated, then set the remote down. The segment recapped the trial, highlighting the evidence against Travers and the testimonies that had sealed his fate. They showed clips of Marcus's speech outside the courthouse, his words resonating with viewers across the country. Jaden watched intently, his expression unreadable. When the segment ended, Jaden turned to his father. Do you think people like him can ever change? The question caught Marcus off guard. He thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I think people can change if they want to. But it takes work, and it takes a willingness to face the truth about yourself. Some people don't want to do that. Jaden frowned, his brow furrowed. Do you think he'll try to hurt us? Travers, I mean. Marcus's heart ached at the fear in his son's voice. No, Jaden. He doesn't have the power to hurt us anymore. And even if he tried, I'd never let anything happen to you. Jaden nodded, but the unease lingered. Marcus knew that fear wouldn't disappear overnight, but he was determined to help his son feel safe again. As the weeks passed, the repercussions of the trial continued to ripple through the community. Travers's conviction had sparked a broader conversation about systemic issues within the police department. Protests and town hall meetings became a regular occurrence, with residents demanding accountability and reform. Marcus attended several of these events, sometimes as a speaker, other times as an observer. He saw the anger, the pain, and the hope in the faces of those who spoke up. It reminded him that the fight for justice wasn't just his, it belonged to everyone who had been silenced or ignored. One evening, Marcus received a call from a journalist who had been following the case closely. They wanted to interview him about his experiences, not just as an FBI agent but as a father. Marcus hesitated, unsure if he wanted to reopen the wounds that were just beginning to heal. But as he thought about Jaden and the importance of telling their story, he agreed. The interview was raw and emotional. Marcus spoke about the challenges of being a black father in a world that often saw his son as a threat. He talked about the fear he felt every time Jaden left the house, the anger he carried from years of witnessing injustice, and the hope that kept him going. The journalist listened intently, their questions thoughtful and empathetic. When the interview was published, it resonated with readers across the country. Messages poured in from parents, activists, and everyday people who had faced similar struggles. Marcus read each one, moved by the shared experiences and the sense of solidarity. But amidst the support, there were also messages of hate, proof that the fight was far from over. Marcus knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he wasn't alone. The trial had been a turning point, not just for him and Jaden, but for everyone who had been affected by Travers's actions. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had shifted, and Marcus was determined to keep pushing forward, one step at a time. The days stretched into weeks, and Marcus began to feel the steady hum of life returning to normal, at least on the surface. Jaden seemed lighter, his laughter more frequent, and his sketches filling the pages of his notebook once again. But Marcus knew better than to assume that the weight of their experience had lifted entirely. Trauma didn't just vanish, it lingered, creeping into quiet moments and unguarded thoughts. Still, seeing Jaden thrive again gave Marcus the strength to keep going. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Jaden worked on a particularly intricate drawing. Marcus watched him from the kitchen, where he was preparing dinner. The boy's focus was intense, his pencil moving swiftly over the page. Marcus smiled to himself, grateful for the sight of his son lost in something he loved. But then Jaden's hand paused, his brow furrowing. He set his pencil down and looked up, his voice breaking the silence. "Dad, do you think people will ever really listen? Like, not just because of what happened to me, but to everyone?" Marcus turned off the stove, walking over to sit beside his son. He glanced at the drawing, a beautifully detailed spaceship soaring through a cluster of stars. Jaden's talent was undeniable, but his question revealed a depth of thought that always caught Marcus off guard. "It's hard to say," Marcus admitted, leaning back against the couch. "Some people are willing to listen and learn, to see the world differently. Others, not so much. But what matters is that we keep speaking up, keep pushing for change, even when it feels like no one's listening." Jaden looked down at his sketch, tracing a finger along the lines he'd drawn. "It just feels like no matter what you do, there are always going to be people who don't care. Like Travers. He didn't care about what he did to me. He probably still doesn't. Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his grip firm but comforting. Maybe he doesn't, Jaden. Maybe he'll never understand the harm he caused. But that's on him, not you. What he did says more about who he is than it ever will about you. Jaden nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I just don't want to feel afraid anymore. Like, when I see a cop, I shouldn't have to wonder if they're going to hurt me. Marcus's chest tightened at his son's words. He wished he could promise Jaden a world where he never had to feel that way, but he knew such a promise would be empty. Instead, he met Jaden's gaze, his voice steady and filled with conviction. You don't have to be afraid, Jaden. Not because the world is perfect or because people like Travers don't exist, but because you're strong. You're brave. And no matter what, you have me. I'll always be here to protect you. Jaden managed a small smile, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He picked up his pencil again, resuming his sketch as Marcus sat beside him in silence, letting the moment settle between them. The following week, Marcus attended another community meeting, this one held at a local church. The room was packed, the energy palpable as residents voiced their frustrations and shared their stories. Marcus listened intently, his heart aching at the familiar patterns of pain and resilience that echoed in each account. When it was his turn to speak, he stood at the front of the room, his FBI badge clipped to his belt, a visible reminder of his dual role as an agent and a father. He began by thanking everyone for their courage in coming forward, acknowledging the difficulty of speaking out against a system designed to silence dissent. Then he shared his own story, not as a federal agent but as a parent. He described the helplessness he'd felt watching his son suffer, the anger that had fueled his determination, and the hope that had kept him going. As he spoke, Marcus noticed a young man in the back of the room, his arms crossed and his expression skeptical. When the meeting ended, the man approached him, his tone sharp but not unkind. Do you really think any of this is going to make a difference? You've got a badge, a platform. What about the rest of us? What do we have? Marcus met his gaze, his voice calm but firm. You have your voice, your story. That's where it starts. I know it's not easy, and I know the system makes it feel like speaking up doesn't matter. But it does. Every voice adds to the pressure, and pressure creates change. The man didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly, the edges of his skepticism softening. Guess we'll see. Marcus left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose, though he couldn't shake the weight of the man's words. He knew the fight for justice was long and often thankless, but he also knew that giving up wasn't an option. Not for him, not for Jaden, and not for the countless others who needed to believe that change was possible. At home, Jaden was waiting for him, his sketchbook open on the coffee table. He looked up as Marcus walked in, his eyes bright with excitement. I finished it, Jaden announced, holding up the drawing. Marcus took the sketch, his breath catching at the level of detail. It wasn't just a spaceship, it was a symbol of resilience. Around it, Jaden had drawn broken chains and rising flames, a powerful representation of breaking free from oppression. Marcus felt a swell of pride as he looked at his son. This is incredible, Jaden, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have a gift. Jaden beamed, his confidence shining through. I was thinking, maybe I could show it at school. You know, as part of the art show. Marcus smiled, nodding. I think that's a great idea. People need to see what you've created. It's powerful. As Jaden carefully placed the drawing back in his sketchbook, Marcus couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The journey they'd been on had been painful, but it had also strengthened their bond and revealed the depth of their resilience. Marcus knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like they were ready to face them together. As the morning sun filtered through the living room curtains, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee and glancing at the newspaper in front of him. The headline read, Local Officer Convicted, a Turning Point for Accountability. Below it was a photo of Travers being escorted from the courthouse, his face grim and defiant. Marcus set the mug down, the weight of everything they had endured pressing heavily on his chest. Justice had been served, but the ripples of that moment were still spreading, touching every part of their lives in ways he hadn't anticipated. Jaden came downstairs, rubbing his eyes and carrying his sketchbook under one arm. He looked more at ease than Marcus had seen him in weeks, his movements less hesitant, his smile coming more freely. He sat at the table and slid his sketchbook toward Marcus. "Do you think this one's good enough for the art show?" Jaden asked, his voice filled with both excitement and nervousness. Marcus opened the book, revealing a stunning drawing of a tree growing through cracked pavement, its roots breaking the concrete apart. The detail was meticulous, each line and shadow carefully placed. Marcus felt a swell of pride as he looked at his son's work. "This is incredible, Jaden," Marcus said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "It's powerful. It shows resilience, growth. People are going to love it." Jaden smiled, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Do you think they'll really understand it? I mean, what it means?" Marcus leaned forward, resting his hand on the table. "They might not all understand it the way you do, but that's okay. Art isn't about making everyone see things exactly the same way. It's about making them feel something, making them think. And this will do that." Jaden nodded, his confidence bolstered by his father's words. "I just want people to know that even when things feel broken, you can still grow." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. Jaden's insight and resilience never ceased to amaze him. "You're right. And you're showing that in everything you do, Jaden. You're stronger than you know." Later that day, Marcus drove Jaden to school with the drawing carefully tucked into a portfolio. As they pulled into the parking lot, Jaden fidgeted with the zipper of his jacket, his nerves starting to show. "What if no one likes it?" Jaden asked, his voice small. Marcus glanced at him, his tone steady and reassuring. "It's not about whether they like it, Jaden. It's about what it means to you. You're sharing a piece of yourself, and that takes courage. That's what matters." Jaden nodded, though his apprehension lingered. Marcus watched as his son walked into the school, clutching the portfolio tightly. He wanted to protect Jaden from every ounce of doubt and fear, but he also knew that moments like this were part of growing stronger. Jaden was finding his voice, and Marcus couldn't have been prouder. The rest of the day passed quietly until the evening arrived and it was time for the art show. Marcus walked into the school gymnasium, the walls lined with student artwork and the room buzzing with conversation. Parents, teachers, and students moved from one display to the next, admiring the creativity on display. Marcus spotted Jaden near his piece, standing with a small group of students who were pointing and whispering. For a moment, Marcus's heart tightened, worried they might be mocking him. But as he drew closer, he heard their words. "This is amazing," one student said, their tone filled with awe. "How did you come up with it?" Jaden, usually shy in such situations, smiled and began to explain. Marcus hung back, watching as his son spoke with confidence and passion about his work. The fear and hesitation that had weighed Jaden down for so long seemed to have lifted, replaced by a sense of pride. When the group moved on, Marcus approached, clapping a hand gently on Jaden's shoulder. "Looks like your work is a hit," he said, his voice warm. Jaden grinned. "They actually liked it. They asked me so many questions about what it meant." Marcus smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "I told you they would. You're showing people something real, Jaden. Something that matters." As the evening went on, Marcus couldn't help but notice the way people were drawn to Jaden's piece. It stood out not just for its artistic quality, but for the story it told. Marcus overheard snippets of conversations, parents and teachers marveling at the depth and meaning behind the work. It was clear that Jaden's message was resonating in ways neither of them had expected. On the drive home, Jaden was unusually quiet, his expression thoughtful. Marcus glanced at him, sensing there was something on his mind. "You okay?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle. Jaden nodded, but after a moment he spoke. "I was just thinking, about Travers. Do you think he ever had something he cared about? Like, something that made him want to do better?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know, Jaden. Maybe he did at some point, but somewhere along the way, he made choices that hurt people. And those choices don't just go away because of what he might have cared about." Jaden looked out the window, his expression contemplative. "I just don't understand how someone can be like that. How they can look at someone and decide they're less important." Marcus sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "It's not something you or I can ever really understand, Jaden. But what we can do is make sure we never become like that. We treat people with respect, we stand up for what's right, and we don't let hate win." Jaden nodded, his gaze distant but thoughtful. "I want to be someone who helps people, Dad. Like you." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You already are, Jaden. You've shown more strength and compassion than most people ever will. And you're just getting started." When they arrived home, Jaden immediately pulled out his sketchbook, flipping to a fresh page. Marcus watched as his son began to draw, the pencil moving confidently across the paper. It was a sight that brought him a deep sense of peace, a reminder that even after everything they had endured, there was still hope, still growth. As Marcus sat back and watched Jaden work, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for justice was far from over, but in moments like this, he was reminded of why it was worth it. For Jaden, for the future, and for the belief that even in the face of darkness, there was always a way to move forward. The months following the trial brought a sense of closure that Marcus hadn't thought possible. The impact of Travers's conviction rippled through the community, sparking deeper conversations about accountability and change. Policies were re-evaluated, and programs aimed at improving relations between law enforcement and the community began to take shape. Marcus stayed involved, attending meetings, speaking at events, and working behind the scenes to ensure that these changes were more than just surface-level fixes. For Jaden, life began to feel normal again, or perhaps something better than normal. He continued to pour himself into his art, his sketches reflecting a depth and maturity beyond his years. His piece from the school art show had garnered attention from local artists and teachers, and he'd been invited to display his work at a community gallery. The invitation marked a turning point for Jaden, a chance for him to see his talents not just as an escape, but as a way to inspire and connect with others. One evening, Marcus and Jaden stood side by side in the gallery, watching as visitors admired Jaden's work. The boy's eyes shone with pride, his confidence palpable as he explained the meaning behind his art to anyone who asked. Marcus watched quietly, a deep sense of pride swelling in his chest. Seeing his son like this, strong, confident, and unafraid, was all the vindication he needed. As they left the gallery that night, Jaden looked up at his father, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you, Dad. For everything. For believing in me." Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice warm and full of love. "I'll always believe in you, Jaden. You're stronger than you know, and you're going to do incredible things." Meanwhile, Travers's fall from grace was far from over. Though he had initially resisted taking responsibility for his actions, the weight of public scrutiny and his conviction left him no room to hide. Former colleagues who had turned a blind eye to his behavior began to distance themselves, their own reputations on the line. Travers's name became synonymous with abuse of power, a cautionary tale for those who thought they could act without consequences. In his isolation, he was forced to confront the damage he had caused, though whether he truly understood the depth of his wrongdoing was a question that lingered unanswered. Samantha continued to work closely with Marcus, their partnership growing stronger as they took on new cases together. She admired Marcus's ability to balance his role as an agent with his role as a father, and their work began to shift toward initiatives aimed at preventing incidents like the one Jaden had endured. Together, they became a driving force for change within their organization, challenging outdated systems and advocating for accountability at every level. For Marcus, the experience had transformed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had always believed in justice, but this journey had taught him the importance of persistence and resilience. It wasn't just about winning a case or securing a conviction, it was about the impact those victories could have on the lives of others. The fight was far from over, but Marcus knew he was ready for whatever came next. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus and Jaden sat on the porch of their home, the air warm and filled with the sounds of summer. Jaden was sketching again, his pencil moving confidently across the page. Marcus sipped his coffee, watching the boy with quiet pride. "Dad," Jaden said suddenly, not looking up from his drawing, "do you think things will really get better? Like, for everyone?" Marcus thought for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I think it's going to take time, Jaden. But I also think every step we take, every voice that's heard, makes a difference. Change doesn't happen all at once, but it does happen. And people like you, people who care, who create, who inspire, they're the ones who make it possible." Jaden looked up, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Then I want to be one of those people. I want to help." Marcus smiled, his heart full. "You already are, son. And I couldn't be prouder." As the days turned into weeks, Marcus and Jaden continued to move forward, their bond stronger than ever. The pain of what they had endured didn't disappear, but it became a part of their story, a story of resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. This story reminds us of the importance of accountability, the strength of community, and the power of resilience in the face of injustice. It's a testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, there is hope for change and a brighter future. What about you? What does this story make you think about? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to stand up for what's right, even when it was difficult? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about how we can all make a difference, no matter how big or small. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Tales of Twist for more powerful and thought-provoking stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.